Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Allahumma salli wa sallim ala sayyidina Rasulullah. We start off with praising Allah and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to baraka in these events today. It's going to be a casual workshop, inshallah, where we're just going to be talking all about autism, inshallah. And if there are people who are with us today who have experienced autism, whether in themselves or in their family members, we encourage you to participate. Actually, we encourage everyone to participate, inshallah. So we don't want anyone to take this as a lecture, because it's not a lecture, inshallah. Having said that, my name is Sohada. I think I recognize some faces, some of you I don't know. And this is our dear sister, Sister Maryam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Madina Sullivan. I'm from Western Massachusetts, born and raised. I really go by Juwayriyah. Everyone knows me by that, so I'll be referring to myself as Juwayriyah from here on forward. I'm happy to be here with you. I ran into a little bit of traffic. We're about 3 hours away going to the west. But alhamdulillah, I'm glad to be here today.
So today, the reason why we wanted to discuss everything that we could about autism and make this really interactive is because there are many, many Muslims in America, in the world, who are living and striving with autism. And the rates of those who are diagnosed with autism continue to rise significantly. And so we need to really understand what it means from a diagnostic, not just a diagnostic level, but we need to understand the faces behind people with autism so that we can relate to them and so that we can help enable them and so that we can also benefit from them and give them a platform in order to give back to society, such as we all want to be able to do, inshallah. This is the flyer that was going on everywhere. This is actually a Mohsin event as well. Mohsin is supporting us with this event. They're behind us. And for those of you who don't know Mohsin is first it started off as a grassroots organization, an advocacy for Muslims with special needs, special education needs, and that sort. But alhamdulillah, now it's a national organization founded by Sheikh Omar Suleiman. We did have an event last month, alhamdulillah, and now the Islamic Center of Knowledge, both Sharon and Quincy, are now certified, at least at the first level, alhamdulillah, which means that not only are we saying that we are welcoming people with different abilities, people with special needs, and that sort, but we are, inshallah, trying to be proactive and really encouraging them to come in, and not just saying that we're people of mercy, but that we're people of action, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, had Allah willed, He would have made you one nation. We all know this ayah, right? I'm sure everyone is familiar with it. But He intended to test you in what He has given you. So race to all that is good. And the reason why this ayah sticks out every time I'm working with people who have different abilities or different needs is because really Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates us all differently. And subhanAllah, the scholars have even used this when they are talking about the diversity of people, not just in their languages, not just in their cultures or their colors or their nationalities or what land they're coming from, but also in their abilities and what they are capable of doing. And if we look back at the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he always honored people, and when he honored people, he would look at where their strengths lie, and he would take those strengths and he would enable them. He wouldn't focus on what they couldn't do and what their weaknesses were. That's why if you study Seerah, you'll realize that Rasulullah, he would look at people and see where they were able to thrive in, and he would make them responsible in that area in order to enable others, in order to give them what is rightly theirs, a place in society, a place in community, and not just someone who's going to be taken back, but someone who's going to feel enabled to also give back, inshallah.
I think that's a very important point, and it was one that we'll also, inshallah, expound on further into the conversation of acceptance and inclusion and what that looks like in Muslim communities and where we are, inshallah, and where we want to go, and acknowledging and making sure that all Muslims are on the spectrum, whether it's from infancy to the youth or to adulthood. So we want to make sure that we are welcoming and understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself is the one who has created us with different abilities, special needs and exceptional needs, and that we have to be understanding and welcoming and supportive, inshallah, of all of the different types of human beings in our communities, inshallah, that we are focused on bringing them in, spreading the da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and making sure that they're supported.
Just adding to what was just said, subhanAllah, the fact of the matter is, many people look at people who aren't capable of what they're capable of doing with an eye of pity. And this is a very big issue that we have. Very, very big issue, because if you're looking at someone, looking at what their limitations are, we all have limitations, right? No one has complete control or perfection in anything except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And everyone has errors. We all have errors, and it's not even about errors, it's just the differences. And if we're able to recognize that, then we will look at others and we'll be able to see where they're at and meet them where they're at in order to help them, enable them. And when we're doing that, we're actually helping ourselves, right? Because subhanAllah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings someone to you, and he brings someone to you that clearly you can help, then for sure, Allah is helping you also reach Allah, subhanAllah. Like when we help others, Prophet Muhammad taught us, when we help others, subhanAllah, and then inshallah, in return, Allah will help us more. And that's actually what the motivation is when working with people who do have special needs or disabilities, subhanAllah, and never to look at them as if they have less, because it could be really that they actually have more, subhanAllah. And actually, I didn't put the ayah in the Quran, but maybe someone in the audience would remember it. The understanding of it is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he tells us those who are blind and deaf, and subhanAllah, in the English translation, it says, they're limited, those are the people who are truly with a disability are those who don't have remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their lives. And by default, hands down, we're all born on fitrah. And many of our children and many of the adults, subhanAllah, with special needs, they have that extra bonus that they are able to maintain their fitrah of connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on deeper levels than someone who, has all of these degrees and advanced, is advanced in the dunya and all that. So we always have to keep that in mind, subhanAllah, without looking at others as if, they are quote unquote disabled, so therefore they can't do this. No, okay, so there's something that they have a problem with. So how can we enable them? How can we enable them so that their strengths can shine? So their strengths can also be a part of the community in which we also benefit from.
Alright, so bismillah, we're going to start with a framework. I think it's really important to really understand what is autism. We're using these words and these jargons, and sometimes it may throw people off if you're not familiar with what it is. What does it mean? Because it is a spectrum, and that means that there's a gradient that goes from beginning all the way down to level 1, level 2, level 3, and people are on different parts of that spectrum. So I think it's really important, inshallah, that we start with the definition and understand what it is and where we are or where your family is, and go from there, inshallah. So I have a very short video that explains it, animated, about what is autism and what does that mean at its core.
We are that's wonderful. Some differences are easy to see. Height, hairstyle, gender, eye color, and so on. Other differences can't be seen. Our favorite foods, ears, or special skills. Interestingly, the way we see the world is also different. For instance, what do you see in this drawing? Most people see a gun, but some of you might have seen a rabbit. Whichever you saw, you are correct. This is just a trick drawing to show you that all brains work differently. The brain is your body's computer. It works differently for all of us and controls how you learn. That's why we are all good at different things. How you feel, which is why we all feel different emotions. And how you communicate. Sometimes the brain is connected in such a way it affects the senses and how we perceive and read situations and interactions. This is known as autism. Many people have autism, so it's likely you already know someone who is autistic. And for this reason, it's useful to know a little bit about autism. The special wiring inside an autistic brain can sometimes make a person good at tasks we may find difficult, such as mathematics, drawing, or music. It can also do the opposite, and activities we find too easy are incredibly difficult to them, such as making friends. The senses constantly send information to your brain about your surroundings and other people. However, when a person's brain and its senses don't communicate well, the brain can become overwhelmed and confused, affecting how they see the world. Picture yourself walking down the street. This is how an autistic brain may experience the same walk. Scary, isn't it? Sadly, in many cases, the person can't say out loud how they feel. So even though there's chaos going on in their heads, they seem okay on the outside, unable to ask for help. We all develop behaviors to help us feel calm in uncomfortable situations. We may look away, hug ourselves, chew our fingernails, fidget, bite our lips, and so on. Equally, autistic people develop behaviors that help them cope with these intense moments. These actions may seem unusual, but they're just their way to feel calm. When they happen, it means they are having a hard time. The kind thing to do is not to give them an even harder time by getting cross, ignoring them, or mocking. Remember, just because a PlayStation can't read an Xbox game, it doesn't mean it's broken. People with autism need friends who are willing to take the time to know them. With good communication and plenty of patience, everyone would be better off. People with autism are not ill or broken. They simply have a unique view of the world. And with a little support from their friends, they might just be able to share their feelings with us. Autism can make amazing things happen.
All right, I think that was a really good video. I use it quite often. It really does get to the core of what autism means on neurobehavioral aspect of the spectrum, where people, our children, our infants, are unable to moderate the information that is going to their brains. It's an overwhelming feeling that causes them to have difficulty with their social development, perhaps in their communication, also in terms of their behavior. So we see with many autists that they're not all the same. But there are some things that are familiar and common with most autists. And stimming or self-comforting techniques is something that they all may do when they're overwhelmed. But basically, autism is defined as a complex, meaning something that is not easy to describe, neurobehavioral condition that includes impairments in social interactions, development impairments, and communication skills. 3 common forms of autism would be your classic autism, where the children or the adults are, they have difficulty communicating, making friends. Social settings may be off-putting to them. That's your classic autism. The other scale may be Asperger's. And you want to explain what Asperger's is? Asperger's is a higher functioning level of autism, and they also, in the same as classic autism, they have a lot of social impairments. However, they may have a lot of technical skills in terms of math and science and buildings and shapes. They could be interested in patterns and things of that nature, highly intelligent. They can speak well generally, where on the other side of the spectrum, when you're getting to PDD, or pervasive development disorder, those children and adults and youth, they may not have the ability to speak as well as children with classic autism or Asperger's. So those are your 3 most common types of autism, which would be classic, Asperger, and then PDD, pervasive development disorder. And then on top of that, children, infants can run the gamut. They can be anywhere in between. So you never really know. It's always something that you're trying to figure out, hence the puzzle pieces that has become a brand of autism. It's so complex. Every person is not the same. I always tell parents when I'm doing advocacy work, if you met one autist, you really have just met one autist. They're not all the same. Even if they have Asperger's, or if they have PDD, or if they have classic autism, they may have similarities, just like we all have similarities. The people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, his creation, we all have similarities, but there's differences as well.
Excuse me, I'd like to add to that. So many of you might know what a stroke looks like. You know, someone who's had a stroke. If you take 2 people who've had a stroke is basically when a part of the brain shuts down. And because when that happens, obviously the function, whether it's speech and language, depending on where on the brain it kind of like broke down, it's going to get affected. Physical mobility, social interaction, everything. If you take 2 people who've had a stroke, who've recently had a stroke, maybe live with different, similar lifestyles, but at the same age, they both had a stroke. Both 2 people are going to look completely different from one another, because there are a lot of factors that go into that. So it's something that we need to also keep in mind. Just because someone hasn't had a stroke, they might be able to walk and talk and problem solve, and they might have a lot of strengths that the next person who had a stroke might not be able to even roll in bed. So when we're looking at diagnoses and we're looking at the classic symptoms and the classic characteristics of different conditions, we also have to. It's good to have that knowledge. It's great. You need that knowledge. That knowledge is essential. But you need to also take that and then figure out the person who's there right in front of you. What does that person need? What are those person's needs? And so when she was speaking about, I think in the beginning, one of the things you mentioned was the sensations that kind of, people with autism in general, every child is different, every adult is different, but people with autism in general, they might have extra sensitivities to certain things. They might have extra sensitivities to sound, to light, to things that they have to touch with their hands, to pressure. you know, they might have extra sensitivities that interfere with their ability to get a good night's rest. They might have extra sensitivities to be able to sit in a classroom with all of these bright pictures on the walls. You know, they might have these extra sensitivities. It might be difficult for someone with those extra sensitivities to be able to tolerate being at the mall for more than a half an hour. You know, so these are the sorts of things that we need to be able to figure out when we're working or when we're seeing or when we're advocating for our own children who might have autism, that even though to the onlooker who doesn't know anything about autism might say, oh, that child's behavior is a little off, that child, you know, they need to be reprimanded or they need a timeout or whatever. No, it's often not because of behavior. It's often because this is how they are interpreting the world through their hyper vigilance to the things that are all around them that are coming at them, you know, subhanAllah. Like, and actually we all have sensitivities to certain things, regardless of whether we have autism or not. So this, just with autism, with children or with people, adults who might have it, we need to make sure that we are accommodating them in a way which they will feel secure, they will feel safe, and they will feel, you know, they have the ability to actually thrive instead of just wanting to cringe and close themselves up in a closet and lock themselves away because the world is such a messy world, you know, subhanAllah. So we have to have that ability to be able to look at that and to see that, and instead of calling it a behavioral issue that, you know, a child has a meltdown, and all children have meltdowns because all adults have meltdowns, whether it's autism or not. But when we see that, we have to be quick to understand that there might be something a little bit more behind the scenes that we're not understanding, that this might not be just like a menace, you know? It's not necessarily someone who's being a troublemaker, you know? And if we can understand that, then that is how we can actually, you know, shift our perspective, change the narrative, and really be more open and welcoming and truly come from a place of concern to welcome them into our masajid, to welcome them into our schools, you know, to welcome them into weekend schools or even the Islamic schools here. It's incredibly important. And instead of saying, oh no, we can't deal with that because it's, quote, autism or special needs, instead of just, you know, saying, no way, you know, no, understand where they're coming from first. Maybe there is a way that we can support them, and inshallah there is, subhanAllah.
Just to piggyback off of that, I think it's really important also to give them space. Space to be safe and included. Inclusion is very important, but at the same time, space to be themselves and to express themselves is really important because the world around them is so different. And all people are different and need and should have access, inshallah, to a space that is safe, that affirms who they are. Oftentimes, we are focused on conforming, making people conform to whatever the standard or the framework is. And we get into a habit of, okay, this is the rule for this, this is the rule for that, especially in the educational field, whether you're doing weekend Islamic school or private Islamic education, it's rules and regulations. It's rules and regulations. This class starts at this time and that class starts at that time. This is the time for this and this. So even though we talk a lot about in education differentiation, that's important. We know that every child is different. But we get so, as adults, we get so tied in and fixated on rules that we don't change.
Yeah. I just want to say one sentence on this.
Yes.
Just don't take it personal. I myself experienced that with my older son at Islamic school.
Mm-hmm.
They take it personal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about you. It's about him.
Yes.
That's right.
Just don't take it personal.
That's right.
It's as simple as this. It's nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Just don't take it personal.
Don't take it
Don't
personal.
take it personally.
Because that's who they are. And that goes back to the ayah that she read in the beginning. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created him. And it's his magnificence. This is beautiful. The variety of humankind. We all have it. We all have diversity. We see it. We can feel it that everyone is different. But some reason, somehow, when it comes to special education or people with exceptional behaviors and exceptional abilities, we become afraid because it's not normal to us. It's not what we see every day. But we have to pull back at that point and say, This is by the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah, in His infinite wisdom, He has created them like this, and this is how they are going to be. And I'm going to get to that a little bit later. This is who they are. How can we nourish them? How can we provide safe spaces for them to learn and grow and to really become their best selves, inshallah. So we're going to move on talking about defining autism. We did that with dignity. But there were some things that we wanted to talk about, the sensitivity to labeling in titles and addressing people, because I think it does vary as well. Again, we're talking about a complex neurobehavioral situation. Every child, every autist, if you meet one, it's just that one. And the same thing with families and caregivers who are dealing with those autists as well. How they refer to conditions, how they call it, maybe they've come up with their own terminology for it, and that's fine. I think dignity is really understanding and respecting the boundaries that people create for themselves. And that's something that we as Muslims, because we have a lot of boundaries that we want others to, all Muslims, we want other non-Muslims to respect our boundaries, to respect how we call ourselves, our names, our culture, our foods. We want to be respected. And the only way that you can do that is to get to know people and talk to them and communicate with them about how they see that. It can't be something from the outside. You just can't come up to one family and say, this is what you are, this is what you're going through, this is your narrative. You have to be respectful of where everyone is and how they want to be defined and how they want their family, their loved ones to be nurtured.
Yeah, and adding on to that as well, there are some people who do have autism, adults who have autism, and they are very proud, and they'll say, don't say I have autism, say that I am autistic. Well, on the other end, there are some people who do have autism, and they'll say, don't call me autistic because I'm more than that. So wherever they are coming from, it needs to be nurtured, honored, and respected. And so we have to be very careful. And so that's why it's always good that when you see someone who is struggling on any sort of level, even if it's not autism, listen to them first. Sit down and listen to how are they explaining themselves. Maybe they're not even bringing their diagnosis into the situation. How are they expressing who they are? And that's where you go from. And that's how you actually honor them and you respect them in that way. And if you're able to do that, then you're able to look past the labels and the diagnoses and what society says of them, subhanAllah. And as Muslims, we should always be looking at others anyway, subhanAllah, with a lens that this is my brother in Islam, this is my sister in Islam, this is, I'm not that child's mother, but this is my child in Islam, regardless of what condition that they have. And if we're able to do that, then we're able to also help ourselves by also has permission to be a little less fearful in offending others. Yes?
Just one comment, sister. Yes, respect and accommodation that comes, it has a direct link with submission. And we as people of faith, if we ourselves, no matter all of us, as I think all of us are, we want to call it autistic or special, all of us are special in so many ways. And if we submit to this one fact that myself, I am a combination of, some abilities and some, deficits.
Right,
And so
absolutely.
is for everybody.
Absolutely.
So if I submit to that fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created me with this combination, I'm not perfect.
That's right.
And so is everybody else. Whether officially somebody is diagnosed with a name, autism, or you call it whatever, but then if you have that fundamental belief that I am not complete and not is anybody else, and this is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the moment I submit, that moment I'm ready to give respect to others because I'm giving respect to myself. So I'm not doing anything special or going out of the way to do something.
Exactly.
This is who I am and this is the other person. So
Yeah.
it's all about giving space. All of us, we need space.
Absolutely.
I have shortcomings and I want people to give me space because of that. So if just we get conscious of our own
Prophet Muhammad says, love for your brother what you love for yourself. You go in and you see a group of children and they're playing, and you see one off in the corner. Go find out what's up with that child. Talk to the other children who aren't including them and say, hey, subhanAllah, it doesn't take a lot of effort actually, but what it does take is a conscious heart who knows that Allah is always above them and watching their every single move. SubhanAllah. Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
What the autism kids, do they feel that they are strange when they sit with the non-autism kids?
That's a really excellent question.
Just because
Yeah.
it doesn't affect themselves inside, that they compare,
Right.
and they see the difference.
So that's a really excellent question. What she asked was, for those who didn't hear her, that's a really, really good question. She said, do the kids with autism or people with autism, do they realize that they are that they're different, that they have different abilities? What I would say to you is when I say, regardless of whether it's autism or whether it's deaf or whether it's Down syndrome or whether it's what, or even if it's someone who's completely nonverbal who can't even move, because I've worked with people like this. What I would say is this: every single person on the face of this earth has a heart. And even if they don't or they can't respond back, and even if they don't express themselves, and even if they might seem unaware, their heart is bleeding. It's bleeding. Their heart is bleeding, and their heart is beating just like ours. And so they are going to feel it on some sort of level. It's sort of like how Sohada tells us in the Quran. This is how I relate it. This is not tafsir, just FYI. This is how I always think of it though. It's just like when we look outside and we know that every single thing out there is worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything. We have no idea how they're doing it, but they are. We sometimes translate and say, oh, when we hear the birds at Fajr, they're saying subhanAllah. This is our translation, but we don't know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala confirms in the Quran that we don't know how His creation worships Him, but we have that confirmation that they do, which means they have an element of a connection with Allah. So if we are looking at children or adults who have autism or special needs, and we don't think that they are understanding us, maybe on a cognitive level they're not, but maybe on a much deeper level they really are. So that is why they are entitled for our respect, and that is why they are entitled for us to keep on rooting for them, despite the fact that it seems like, oh, they're not going to really notice. They will notice, because their hearts will feel it, regardless of how they express that or not. And Allah knows best.
I just want to add one more thing. And what those people need is not pity. They just
That's
need
right.
kindness
Yes.
and accommodation.
Yes.
These are the
She's,
most important
yeah,
things.
she's saying something that we are definitely on board with, that these people in general, no one likes to have pity thrown on them. No one loves that pity card. Pity is when you feel, it's like sympathy. Pity is sometimes used as sympathy. It's when you look at someone, and yeah, as Muslims we care for others and we feel bad for these people, and that, okay, you could feel bad, but how is that feeling bad going to transfer into empowering them to be more independent, to be more functional, to be more expressive, to have that support that they need? So they don't need pity, their families don't need pity, they need people to roll up their sleeves and say, look, I'm coming to pick you up, you're coming to the masjid with me. Or look, I found this great program, or let's go to the park, or just calling them and saying, hey, what's up? How's everything going? Assalamu alaikum. Regardless of whether you're going to discuss special needs or not. They need to feel included, and they have a right to feel included. One ummah, right? This is what Prophet Muhammad taught us. One ummah.
So again, I just wanted to go over some of those definitions about the spectrum. So I have a visual here, so I wanted to you to see it, and I think it's important that we know that it is a spectrum. And going back to the question from the sister, it really does have a lot to do their cognitive ability on where they are on the spectrum.
Cognitive meaning the ability, the way they think.
Yeah, think and understand what is happening around them and respond to that. The higher functioning, for lack of a better term, as it's been described, for sure, those children who are able, and adults who are able to talk and have conversations, even though it may be impaired in some level, they may be able to express their disregard disregard or their discomfort in how people are treating them. So it may not be as swift, as immediate as the next child without neurobehavioral issues, but they may be able to see it, acknowledge it, and verbally say, I don't like the way that person is treating me. So just because someone is an autist doesn't mean that they can't verbalize discomfort or pity or shame or embarrassment. They definitely feel those things. Going down the spectrum, as Sohada was talking about, nonverbal children, adults, they may not be able to express it verbally. They may not have the cognitive ability to understand what they are feeling, but for sure they can feel it. And we see this in their behavior. They may become fidgety, they may start to pinch themselves, they may start to hit themselves, or they may start to hit someone else, they may have a meltdown, or they may scream because it doesn't feel right in their heart. So they don't like what's happening. It could be overwhelming for them to be in a situation at the masjid where they're regulated to a dark room, where no light, or there's no one in there with them, or they're, or in, every day going to a school program, it's not engaging, it's not fun, so they're overwhelmed. And they don't know how to express that, they don't have the verbal ability to express that. But behaviorally, they for sure can express that. There's meltdowns, and there's hitting, there's some stimming, you may see them rocking, they may start humming or screaming, they may pull their hair, and all of this is a response. SubhanAllah. So this is a response. So they all are able to express themselves, whether it's verbally or not. Allah has given them the ability to express when they're happy, when they're sad. They may smile, they may sing a familiar tune, or they may take your hand. My daughter loves to hold people's hand. When she's happy, she'll hold your hand and rub it. So there's an expression, and there's a transmitting of communication that is always constantly happening.
Actually, I want to add to that. About 20 years ago, was the first time I worked with a child who has autism, 3 years old. I always make dua for this kid. He's stuck in my heart and my head, and I ask Allah that he becomes Muslim and all that. I hope you all will join me in that dua for him. His name was David. I was working in Miami, SubhanAllah, that's where I went to school. And it was at the Easter Seals. I don't know if you've heard of Easter Seals or not. It was at an Easter Seals. And the therapists there would tell me, he doesn't make eye contact with anyone, and he's off the wall, and we don't know what to do with him. And these are the therapists who were educated and trained. They didn't, SubhanAllah, I don't know what it was. And of course, it was the barakah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I would just go to his classroom door. He didn't make any eye contact with me, but he knew I was there. He would come running up to me, and he'd be pulling out my, out my lab coat that I used to wear or whatever it was. And he would never make eye contact with me, but he knew I was there, and he made himself known that I knew that he was there, and he knew that every time I took him, before sitting down to do any sort of fine motor, like exercises with him, or any handwriting or whatever, even though he was 3, there are fine motor things that he needed to work on, he knew I was going to take him to what we call the sensory room. And the sensory room was a darkened room. I had a swing coming from the ceiling like this. And basically he would get into that swing, and he'd swing for a few minutes in very, very calm, rhythmic sort of pattern. And then after he was nice and calm, he would actually jump into the ball pit. SubhanAllah. He was regulating, I put him in an environment where he was able to regulate his own sort of sensations, with just some structure. And then after that, we can go into a room that had bright lights, and we can sit down and we can do some sort of functional learning activity, SubhanAllah. And so, having said that, every child is completely different from the next, and every child has their own sort of, strengths and weaknesses, but finding those strengths and maximizing on it, there's no better feeling in the world than to see that happen and see that happen in progress. But that can't happen in this Muslim community, unfortunately, in the masajid and in the schools, unless we start to break down some barriers. until we start to eradicate the misconceptions that we have of people with special needs or exceptional needs or disabilities or whatever it is you want to call it. We can't. We won't be able to do that, subhanAllah. So, for instance, there are a lot of Muslim families that we're starting to know of, but still, there are a lot of Muslim families who still aren't coming out and saying, I have this, or my child has that, or this is a situation that we're struggling with. And one of the reasons why they are timid and being open in public and letting the community know about that. There might be some who are, mashallah, very visual, alhamdulillah, but there are so many others who are not coming out. And why is that? Because they're afraid of rejection. They're afraid of being rejected. They don't want to hear what will break their heart and saying, no, sorry, your child can't be in our weekend program. No, I'm sorry, your child cannot come to the halaqah. Not that anyone would say that, but just, you don't have to say something in order to understand the attitudes of the people. I don't think anyone would ever say you're not welcome in the masjid. We're a people of mercy. We say we love these people, and we do, alhamdulillah. Now is the time to roll our sleeves and do the work so that they are actually encouraged to come in. So that's one of the things, breaking those taboos and misconceptions. And the other thing is also to understand that it's actually okay to be struggling, because we're all struggling. There's not a single one of us who has a perfect life. No one is free of imperfections except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one. No one. And if we study the lives of the prophets, we'll see that. If we study the stories in the Quran, we'll see that, subhanAllah. So who gives that we should be looking at someone and assuming that we think we know that this is just the behavioral issue that we see? You know, or who gives that we should look at someone and look at them with eyes of pity and say, yeah, I really feel bad for them, and make dua and then just walk away without being able to actually go over there and say salam to the person. You know, we're people of action. We're supposed to be a people of action, right? We're supposed to step up when we can. And doesn't mean that we have to move mountains, but just baby steps. Do whatever is within your ability. There's a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows you to see people who have autism in the masjid. You might not know they have autism, but I can almost guarantee that there are people here who do. You know? I hear stories of kids trying to get to the Islamic Academy as well. In all fairness, in all honesty, I hear that. And I hear things that happen. And there are a lot of symptoms of the stories that I hear of not just children, but adults who don't just have autism, but have other special needs as well. But no one is calling it that. Why? Because the families are fearful of rejection. The other misconception that I see that is very profound, very, very profound, is unfortunately a lot of the times people will go ahead and say, this is due. Families, unfortunately, they come and they have these preconceived notions that this is due to evil eye, or this is due to magic, or this is due to possession, you know, when they see these abnormal, quote-unquote, abnormal behaviors happening. Instead of understanding it, as Sister Juwayriyah was explaining to us, the overload of sensory input and what a child does, they might look at that and they might say, wow, what's wrong with that kid, you know? Does that he have any gym problems? Or look at that, you know? That's not the case. It can happen. I'm not saying it can't. That stuff is real. That stuff is for real, and I deal with that stuff sometimes helping sisters in the community. That stuff is for real. But should that always be the first go-to thing or go-to theory? No. Yeah. Uncle Batari, you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a question, if I may.
Yeah.
How about research now? Are there any cases? Number one, obviously, I'm sure research is being done on this subject. Now, are there any known cases where by therapy or by some medication or some, that has then been improvement in the lives of people, children with autism?
I think it is definitely research out there in regards to different types of therapy for autism. Whether you're talking about CBD oil, which is a real craze right now, going back to Charlotte's Web.
CBD oil is the oil that comes from marijuana, actually. Yeah.
And I know Mass General Hospital was the first hospital in the United States to run a trial for epileptics with autism. So trying to moderate their behavior, their moods, and things like that. They put it into taking away the THC, which is the what do you call it? So it's the ingredient
in the marijuana plant that actually causes someone to get high. So what they do is they take the marijuana and they take the THC out, and then they still have this substance which is pure CBD oil, which has shown their studies, and they're still doing studies there, to show that this is actually a positive thing for some people who have autism. Yeah.
Can I share my own experience?
Yes, please do.
Overall, a very healthy diet helps
Yeah.
children, at least in my experience.
Yeah.
And also what I've discovered recently, and I started with my kids, and honestly it works. I'm not sure if it's just my media that's making it work.
Actions are based on intentions,
Yes.
according to Prophet Muhammad. So we don't disregard that.
Yes.
Media is important.
And actually camel milk. It has been working great.
Camel milk. I've heard actually a lot about camel milk when I was in Saudi Arabia.
My kids
Yeah.
have been on camel milk
Mhm.
for the past 3 to 4 months. It is super expensive.
Where do you get it from?
Online,
Online.
but it is super expensive, I'm telling you. California, desert,
California?
Yes,
Really?
it's called Desert Farm.
Mhm.
They ship to your house.
Oh, I need to write that down.
Yes.
Me too.
You know,
Yeah.
based on my own experience, like I
Yeah.
said, it is super expensive. It's like $100 for bottles of 6.
Mm.
And my kids drink smoothies every morning.
Mm.
So it's probably 400, 500 a month.
Mhm.
But it really helped with cognitive skills, with speech. It it mellowed down the behaviors, and I mean, it just helped them on every skill.
So, subhanAllah, thank you for bringing that up, because I knew some families when we were living in Medina that actually used camel milk for their children who had ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and stuff like this, and it really did help. But I didn't think that they had that here. I'm sure it was, like you said, anything could be ordered online anyway.
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
but like I said, healthy diet overall.
Yeah.
No processed food,
That makes
all
sense.
organic, balanced diet,
Yeah.
no sugar, definitely no sugar. It really helps.
Yeah. I mean, even with kids who don't have autism, adults who don't have autism,
Yes.
when you go on an overload of sugar, and all that stuff affects your cognition, your memory,
Especially
your everything.
processed, I would say
Yeah.
especially processed food, just stay away from processed food.
Yeah, mashallah.
And it really shows. Honestly, it shows. And one more thing too, what kind of help autistic children is being around animals in general, but especially horses, we found. And they do have a program which is called what therapy.
Yes.
I'm sure you're familiar with
Yes,
it.
they have the
It does help the kids
Yeah,
with
mashallah.
the speech language.
Inshallah.
If anybody needs to, I mean,
Yeah.
based on my own experience, it works. It really works.
Just a little bit for sharing that.
Yes.
But we're not going to go into specific therapies, but this is wonderful that you're able to show that
Yeah.
so that others can benefit.
I just wanted to add to the brother's question about the research. Yes, there has been tremendous in almost all the areas related to the brain development and the physical development of the special needs. And the studies, they definitely show the earlier, the sooner, the better. So it's very important to really recognize early on with the child that if you find something different, and then find the resources, and our schools here especially, they are equipped with the the speech therapy, the occupational therapy, physical therapy. So yes, as early you start the intervention, the sooner you start seeing the results.
Yes,
And
early intervention is incredibly important. It's so important.
cognitively, the brain is developing till age 25. So you know that if that is the area that is affected, so you can still work on. But yes, the earlier the better, and you see the results.
Can I just add to that?
Please do.
You know, it's very important what she said, but I found that at least for Muslim families, what creates a hurdle is denial.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Denial.
And
Yeah,
I'm sorry
exactly.
for this,
Because
but
they don't
especially
go,
from the dads,
yeah,
especially from
because
the
they don't
dads.
go for the early
Yes.
intervention, and then they
At
don't
the
go to the
beginning,
appointments.
exactly,
Yeah.
they're in denial.
Yeah.
No, I have the perfect child.
Yeah.
No, he's fine, he just has speech delay, he'll be fine, he'll catch up his peers. But it doesn't happen, and instead of going, starting the services at an early age, it doesn't start until like 3 or 4 years later.
Yeah.
And that can affect that child big time.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. One of the first things that we start to see with children who are diagnosed with autism, one of the things, of course there are other, so let me just backtrack. So when I first started working with children with autism back in the day, it was like 1 in every 120 children were diagnosed with autism. This was like 20 years ago. Now it's like 1 in 59. every 50, like if you get a group of 59 children, at least one of them, subhanAllah, statistically will have autism or will be within that spectrum. That is a high percentage. That's a high percentage. So we don't really have room to be, we don't have any more room to be digging our heads under the rug pretending it's not happening.
And it's very sad because we are Muslims.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
supposed to just say Alhamdulillah and
Yeah.
you know and do.
Right.
Just say Alhamdulillah and
People
say.
action,
Just
exactly.
and start doing, be doers.
Yeah.
We are a nation, a doer. We're supposed to be
Exactly.
like a doer nation.
Yeah, subhanAllah, it's so true. And so the thing with denial too, I think that the moms always, because they tend to be the ones obviously with the children, right? So I think the moms always kind of pick up things quicker than the fathers. Not to say that the fathers don't, male overboard everyone. But I think one of the things too that we need to really, really pay attention to is the lack of language that happens with natural speech and language development. And I say this not just for autism, I say this for any sort of disability or any sort of, development really, because when a child is not really meeting those milestones with speech and language, one of the first things that they do, they want to go get a speech and language evaluation. But even prior to that, and I say this as a mom of 2 children who are deaf, alhamdulillah, one of the very first thing that we should do is go get your ears checked, go see an audiologist. Make sure you have the ability to hear well before assuming that you just, because you have to start from the get-go, from the very beginning, check it off. Inshallah, the hearing is fine, but let's just check that off first. That's also very essential. And that's why they do newborn hearing screens as well, in all the states right now, alhamdulillah. But that's also another thing, because with autism, with Down syndrome, with all of these other diagnoses and conditions, there tends to be a significant amount of them that have also hearing loss as well. So that's something that you also need to at least rule it out that the hearing is okay before proceeding with therapies.
I think we're going to move on to how to be supportive.
Okay.
We got to cover the other one.
Yeah.
We need to.
Yeah.
Muslim advocacy. I'm going to start on that.
Sure. So how to be supportive? We've kind of been talking about this all along since we've been here. Oh, did I just turn that off? Hello. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we already talked about the differences between sympathy and having empathy, and that's the reason why, alhamdulillah, as far as the chair of the committee of Project Empathy, where we're really trying to nurture not just bringing in an awareness, but bringing that support, that one-on-one support, that physical support, that whatever kind of support that we can give. It doesn't have to always cost money, subhanAllah. Making sure that we're a supportive environment for people with special needs or different needs. And subhanAllah, when we're talking about that, we're talking about action steps, like you had also mentioned, subhanAllah. Really being able to, roll up your sleeves and do the work, And we know these very simple ahadith that many of us, we just disregard, saying assalamu alaikum to someone, seeing someone actually stroll into the masjid in a wheelchair, and not being shy to go over there and, say something to the kid, even if the kid can't see you, or if the kid can't hear you, or whatever it is. Going out of your way should not be something that is out of our way as Muslims. It is a responsibility, it's a responsibility for that. And subhanAllah, we know that the hadith of Prophet Muhammad where he says the parable of the believers in their affection, mercy, and compassion for each other is that of a body. When any limb aches, the whole body reacts with sicknesses and fever. And subhanAllah, we've been hearing this hadith a lot, especially in light of what's gone on in Churchill, subhanAllah, but this, I think with more calamities that happens and more trials that happens, in our ummah, this hadith is going to keep on coming up as a reminder to us. But this should be by default what we think of when we see someone struggling on a level which we are not struggling on. It should be a reminder of our struggles, and it should be a reminder for us to lift them up by any means that we can, inshallah. So when we're talking about inclusion in the masjids, in the halakas, and we're talking about Muslim advocacy, we're really trying to talk about making sure the spaces are available for them. Not just the physical space, but that emotional space as well. Because we're all emotional beings, and this is deeply rooted in our deen. And Prophet Muhammad, it is said, that he, of course, is Rahmat al-Alameen, the Prophet of mercy. But to take it up even higher, like if you're looking at translations and all that, he was also the prophet of empathy. Because mercy is when you look at someone and you have mercy on them. But empathy is actually when you're actually doing something to help them, to help lift them up, subhanAllah, by any means. And if you don't know about autism, if you don't know about special needs, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to. All you have to do is fear Allah. All you have to do is make sure that you know that Allah's watching you. And it's okay to ask. A lot of us want to be hush-hush about things. It's okay to expose the situation, And this is actually going towards the families who might be watching this, at a later time, who might not be here. It's okay to say, my child has autism. It's okay to say, I'm a father of someone who has autism. It's not going to show bad on you. It's not going to show bad on you, Dad, or you, Mom. It's not. If anything, it shows that Allah has honored you. He's chosen you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never gives anyone anything greater than what we can bear. So there's something incredibly important that we have to be loud about and help others who we know who might be struggling with these situations to also be loud about. Because this is how we're going to be more inclusive in the masajid. Because it starts in the home, and then it comes into the masajid, and then it goes into the Islamic schools, and it's out in the community. Like when I was at Masjid Nabawi, one of the times, every year I would see this. Around the time where so in Mecca and Medina, they have like the Umrah times are pretty much throughout the year. With the exception of right after Hajj, they close it off for a little bit. They close off for Umrah, so there are no Umrah visas for people coming in for about maybe about a month and a half after Hajj. So then it would be the locals going into the masajid, the Masjid Nabawi. And so when I would go there, I'd be able to get near Rawda. Rawda is a special place in Masjid Nabawi. And I would see almost every single year, I would always see like a classroom of children, or a classroom of even teenagers, of course on the women's side, right, so they're girls with Down syndrome all wearing hijab, walking in and doing their thing, and it was like normal, because it is normal, it is normal. And having said that, I also want to make, I know I'm kind of going all over the place, I'm sorry, kind of going all over the place, but one thing I want to make sure that I address is also, I put a slide, there's a slide up there, but whatever, making sure that when we see Muslim children, or even Muslim adults with special needs, or they need something a little extra, not to assume that the fund obligations are not for them. Not to assume that they don't have a right to learn about Allah. Not to assume that, okay, we have an easy case, we don't have to deal with, exerting ourselves and teaching them about who Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is because they can't talk anyway. Or because, they don't pay attention and they're exempt anyway. Let's not assume that. There is a wild misconception. I saw it over there and I see it here, where there are some Muslims who say, قَدَرَ اللَّهُ مَا شَاءَ فَعَلَ, and this is what we should say anyway. Everything is by the planning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when we say that, we don't give them the dignity or the respect or the honor in teaching them what they need to know in order to be Muslims themselves. So we have to take that information and break it down for them in a way that they can understand it, so that therefore they can live it. So if there are no programs in the masjid for them, and I know there's nothing going on at home as well, and they're going to public school, and the parents, and therefore the community, and then the society, and the masajids are all saying, these kids with special needs, they don't have to know anything about Allah, and they don't have to know anything about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. They don't need to know about Jannah because, you know what, they're going to Jannah anyway. Let them do whatever, it's okay. This is not good for their hearts. Because every heart needs to connect with Allah. Every single heart Allah creates is created for the purpose of connecting with Him. So how dare we even be presumptuous and assume that they are not people who are worthy of learning about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because mashallah, they already have a cover. They have an entrance ticket already to Jannah Firdaus al-A'la. We're hoping we're going to go there with them, but we're not sure about that. That sort of thing.
Yes. And actually, this is, like, again, I'm just going to speak for myself. This is what Muslim families with special needs children need from the Muslim community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because honestly, any other services you can get outside, but these kids have the right to an Islamic education within their community.
Yeah.
And like speaking for myself, this is the only help that, like I said, Muslim families with special needs actually need. It's just having programs.
It's
like
the
you
main
said.
thing, right?
It's just that.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Because with like, it's true you gain some experience because you learn it from services, from like ABA services. They teach you how to deal with them from the research you do yourself. But still, it's so hard to sit with them and teach them Quran, for example, or Hadith. You need somebody qualified.
Yeah, you do.
So when are we gonna start seeing like programs with, for example, therapists and then special educators?
Inshallah, soon in this community.
This is my question.
This is our goal.
Yeah.
Inshallah, very, very soon.
Because
Ya Rab, ya Rab.
being special needs doesn't mean you're not Muslim. They
Exactly.
are Muslims.
Yeah.
And actually, that's what breaks our hearts as parents. Because you're like, I want my child to know Quran, to know the Hadith,
Right.
to wake up in the morning and say the dua for waking up, and then to say
And it's more than just like the routine of
Yes.
saying our du'ats and praying. It's about helping them connect with Allah.
Yes.
You know, it's so a child who is 7 years old and can't stand 7 years old, Prophet Muhammad SAW taught us to teach our children how to pray, right? At 7. By the time they're 10, they should be able to do it. Well, our children with special needs, obviously, they need extra, or not extra, but they need maybe a different approach. So a father brings his child, ADHD, autism, whatever it is, comes in, he stands next to him in the line, for instance, in the musalla, when it's time to pray, but the child, he can't stop moving, he's turning around, he's looking behind him, he's doing all this. Give him something to hold. Give him something to hold. Oh, is that haram for him to hold something? No, inshallah, it's not haram for him to hold anything. Give him a fidget toy. Get it. If he's a short little kid, give him a step stool to stand on when he's standing. Accommodating him. Accommodating him based on his needs.
And his abilities.
Yeah, and his abilities. And this does not contradict our deen. This is what Rasulullah taught us. Subhanallah. So it's these small little things make huge differences. Subhanallah.
And imagine if teaching somebody something is a sadaqah jariyah.
Yeah.
So I can just let your imagination, really think, what is it teaching it to a special need?
Yeah, exactly.
It's probably twice as that.
Yeah.
Yes, I just would like to make a comment. For autism or non-autism, healthy or non-healthy kids, the role of the parents is 60% to affect his or their kids. So if the parents do not know much about Islam, don't count on the community.
Absolutely.
To teach them.
Oh,
No.
yeah.
The parents
Definitely.
should have 60 to 70% depend on the parents.
That's right.
Absolutely. Of course.
Yes.
So that's why we need to create programs for those parents. And we have to create, because they're so busy with bringing them to Boston Children's Hospital and for their therapy appointments and the discomfort that they even feel with coming into the masjid because they're afraid that their child is going to offend everyone in the musalla. So we need to create that warm space for the parents, of course, first and foremost. Because inshallah, that's how the parents will be empowered to be better advocates for their children. Yeah, inshallah.
But for sure, I think that we do have to acknowledge that parents are so important in making sure that their children stay on the fitra that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them with. No doubt about that. As an educator, we say all the time, we're only with your children for a certain amount of time. They're with you most of the time and the weekends and things. You have to be able to advocate for your children. You have to be that. You are their first responsibility. So you have to make sure that that is something that you are interested in and that you're expressing that to the Muslim community, that you go into the masajid and you let the imam know and that you let the board know. We need this. Acknowledge my children. Acknowledge a significant part of the Muslim community. And that's really how we support ourselves and support others in the community, is that we acknowledge, that we exist. We acknowledge that we need support. We acknowledge that when you're having these meetings, you're having these budgetary, conversations, that we're included, that you don't forget about us, that you acknowledge different abilities within the ummah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He created us with good and bad in the middle, whether it's a strong believer or a weak believer, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's good in both. Whether this parent is coming to the masjid just only during Ramadan or during the Eid, bringing their children or not, they still exist. Maybe those are the only times that they have enough energy or enough support to get there.
That's right.
So whether they're all the time or only half the time, or they're dropping in, acknowledge that they're in your community. Acknowledge that they need support. But you as a parent, don't disregard the power and the necessity of your voice and being active and saying what you need and going up to the Muslims and saying, like she said, don't be ashamed of it. Don't be ashamed.
Yeah, agree. But even one step back from this, then you're absolutely right, going out in the masajids and wherever. But I think the first step is just acknowledging as a parent, like especially when it comes to teaching religion to our children. I mean, just take them as like we take our quote unquote mainstream children. Just teach them the same way: prayer time, wudu time, Quran time.
Modeling is very important.
Whether they just respond to in that way that we expect sometimes, and a lot of times actually we feel like they're not getting anything, but trust me, they do. It's somewhere going in their heads,
Something's
and
happening.
it comes out later on, and
Yeah.
that they give you so many times with my personal experience. They will surprise you
Mhm.
because 10 years ago, 5 years ago, they prayed with you or they learned something and it stick to their mind, but they could not express that or demonstrate in that right moment. But then later on, like, oh, I didn't teach this. Yes, you did teach this.
Yeah.
But what happens, and the main point is that really recognize that these are regular children.
Yeah.
They have needs, but they are regular. Just treat them regular. Just be
Yeah.
conscious of that.
Right.
Rather, as soon as a child is whether diagnosed or not, it's different. We tend to get into that blaming mode. Like, whose fault is this, husband's or wife's?
Yeah.
And already we know from the statistics that the divorce rate is very high amongst the autistic families. And we as Muslims, we are not, different from them.
No, we're not.
Our numbers are equal.
Yeah.
It's amazingly high number of divorce rate because of these children, because we get into this mode, like, who is responsible?
Right.
Mostly it comes on the wife.
And
Yeah. Which is
forgetting
not
that
true.
Allah
Which is not
subhanahu
true.
wa ta'ala, this is his
Yes,
decree, right?
research-
We didn't do anything. It's
Yeah,
only by the will
research
of
tells
Allah
that
subhanahu
there
wa
is
ta'ala.
no such thing so far that we have discovered. That is, it is because of the mom, or if there is something came out that is on the dad. But let's don't get into that. The thing is just putting the forces together, put our abilities together to embrace, and then again the point comes to the submission. If we are full of myself, like, oh my God, this cannot happen to me, then yes, this is happening to you. Then find anybody to blame for that, right? So, but the other point what sister was saying, when these kids, and I can swear on that when children and my kids with being now throughout going to the private schools, the not Islamic school, we are not equipped with yet to do that. But now going and whatever they are practicing, prayer or Quran, now they become your tool for dawah, which is actually my responsibility, but they are doing it. How? Whatever little bit they can talk, they tell their teachers, their therapists, oh, Ramadan is coming, or this, or they, wherever they are, they start praying, in the bus, in the classroom, and initially they are wondering, what is this? Is some behavior or something? And they tell, oh, I'm praying. So this is the dawah, this is the indirect dawah that these kids are doing for what they taught from their
Yeah, I just want to add to what she's saying, and stay on the supportive side of it. Those kids are worth investing on.
They are.
They are worth
Yeah.
invested on, because, like she said, those kids with the right support, they thrive and they grow up to be very successful adults.
They really do. They really do. MashaAllah.
And
Barak.
just an example, I'm not sure if you ladies watched The Good Doctor.
No, I haven't seen it.
Okay, I really recommend everybody watching this series. It's on Hulu. It is about an autistic surgeon, a neurosurgeon. It is an excellent series. Matter of fact, I had my kids watch it with me. My little guy, he's in kindergarten now, he started reading. I asked him whether he wants to watch a cartoon, and then he was like, no, I want to watch The Good Doctor.
MashaAllah.
An
Because
excellent,
he sees himself,
it's
right?
an excellent example
Representation.
of what that shows that they are worth investing on,
Yeah.
and actually they can grow up to be a great force for
Right.
the Muslim
Representation is very important.
Yes.
That's why we need to have programs inside of our massages so that, we can have, people who are autistic working in the masjid, cleaning up in the masjid,
Yes.
helping other younger autists in the masjid. Yes, Assalamu alaikum.
My name is Hamid Ahrizi, and I have experience working with autism kids. My profession is martial arts. I was a former USA team coach and president, kickboxing team. Been teaching martial arts for 38 years in the United States. And I had a great experience about 12 years ago. It was a family that had one autistic kid. And he comes to the gym and he sits on the chair, he starts jumping around, and then I always interact with him. And I asked him, why don't you let him do karate? So we tried it the first kid. And the family, even doctor sees the difference. Because we treated him, as normal as the other kids.
Yes.
Class, he was following instructions, he was jumping, rolling around. So he was using his energy.
Yeah.
And
In a
of course,
positive
he
way.
was stronger than his other brother. For some reason, he had a lot of strength.
They do.
And he used that. So we used that strength, in martial arts. Like wrestling, pushing and shoving the other kids. And he started understanding to the point where he would stand up by himself. And I would call in techniques. And he would follow me. The mother told the doctor that they couldn't believe it. They said, we have to see it to believe it. So they came in without telling me who they are. They just came in and sat there like with the, parents like the usual class. And they watched and they were really impressed. So a month later, I ended up with 8 kids. But I couldn't mix them with normal kids because it was a lot of pressure.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
is.
that's
It
okay.
is.
That's-
So what I did, I offered free classes for the autistic kids, which was our first class was like 3 to 4. Our second class was 4 to 5 for little kids. But we ended up having a class for 8 kids.
Inshallah.
I had doctors coming in and visit me. How can you control 8 kids by yourself when we can't even control 1? I said, I don't know. I don't know nothing about the autism. First, they told me I couldn't even say the word autism. When they told me this was the symptoms of the kids, I said I just treat them normal.
Yeah.
I treat them just like a normal kid. He's in my class. I gotta make the class fun.
Yeah.
And
Engaging.
Engaging them.
I use his energy, okay, see the level of the energy of the kids, and I give him the exercise. There's a fun exercise, there's instructional exercises, like directional exercises. So there is different style exercises to make it fun for a kid to follow, and listen. And they use the energy. And we find out, I'm not an expert in this, we find out that they enjoy it more. Because it's something they see and they can copy, or they do and they feel like comfortable doing with their body, like a somersault.
Yeah.
Like they don't do strictly karate, kick and punch. So we give him the bat,
Yeah.
we give him gloves. He punches the bat.
Yeah.
Why? Because he sees other kids doing it. So alhamdulillah,
Alhamdulillah,
it worked very well.
mashallah,
Till this day,
Yeah.
I run the classes here, alhamdulillah, in Sharon, and I run another program in Quincy, Masjid Quincy for martial arts. And we have a kid, an autistic, with 3 other brothers and sisters. The therapist still comes to this day. Every class she comes and sees. But I give him more attention. I make him my assistant. He counts with me.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's the thing that you're empowering them. Then,
Yes,
inshallah, which is
exactly. See,
excellent.
that's what they need.
That's what they need.
Yeah, they need to feel like, they're normal too.
Yeah.
They feel like, and he
Exactly.
wears uniform, his belt, he's
Yeah.
going for his belt test. The young doctor became a therapist. She was shocked. It's like, what makes this kid listen to this guy? And this guy's not easy.
Yeah.
He's yelling and shouting at him.
Yeah.
But I yell and shout at the moment when it happens.
Yes,
Yeah.
we will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually,
If you could share your information with, maybe put up your name or
Yeah.
a card on the
So,
table.
like I said, and the kid is really interested in us. He's doing very well, and I treat him just like a normal kid. But I'm a little bit special
Yeah.
because I have him my side.
Yeah.
Right.
So I tell him, you are the assistant.
Adaptive.
instructor.
Yeah.
You are my assistant instructor.
Yeah.
I want you to
Right.
call up now. Call up the kids. Okay, count for them.
Yeah.
So I give him a task. And meantime, he feels responsible, and he feels like he's powerful.
Right.
And he follows class. And to this day, I have the name of the person. the doctor that comes,
Yeah.
alhamdulillah, everything.
Alhamdulillah.
Enough said, I would love to, if it's okay, I would love to offer, not strictly martial art, but like exercises, classes, and fun class, good activities for kids, for no charge, in this masjid, inshallah.
Inshallah.
If it's possible.
With
I
different
would
special
love to,
needs,
it's an honor
inshallah.
to me.
Yeah.
You know, I want to use what I know, what I learned,
Okay, so I'll put you
and
in
I
the
work with
project.
kids for over.
I'm gonna put you in the
That's
project
awesome.
empathy committee.
And they
because-
need that. They
Inshallah,
need to
because-
be able to use their energy.
Yeah, exactly.
All
They-
my life
they
I
have-
worked with kids, and my youngest student is like 2 years old. My oldest is 66 years old,
Yeah,
and I have a good experience to work with kids. So like I said,
yeah,
for
mashallah.
the 38 years I've been doing martial arts.
That's great, inshallah. That would be a wonderful. Maybe that will be our
I
next
would
project
love to.
then.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
inshallah.
a time
Please
schedule.
share your email. I know I live in Quincy. I see you guys every
Yes,
Thursday over
yes.
there.
Yeah.
I'm there.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Uncle is,
expect an email from me.
yeah.
Inshallah.
I want
Okay.
Alhamdulillah, that's beautiful.
Uh,
That's how we'll do it.
Alhamdulillah, we have an empathy committee, and I want you to be a member of that committee.
Yeah.
Inshallah.
Yeah,
It's so
definitely,
important.
yeah.
I'll
Just
be
like
calling a
Uncle
meeting,
is-
inshallah,
yeah,
very
you'll be on top of
shortly.
that.
We have
Activity
meeting.
is very
Excellent,
important.
excellent.
Yes,
That's
this is
wonderful.
what I think, because see, this is the thing. Some of them they're very strong,
Yeah,
physically strong, and some of them they're weak.
yeah.
Some of them,
No,
the body part is not balanced too.
Yes.
You know, they may have a strong
Yeah.
arm, but they have weak legs.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
because
muscle
it's
tone.
It's the
Yeah.
tone.
Yeah.
It's the tone
Yeah.
that's not
That's why
regulated, and
we
that's
give them
probably,
the
that's why,
exercises.
yeah, and that's why they need, that's why you find
The
a lot of them
exercise.
in
Yes.
OT and in PT, you know, the occupational therapy and the physical therapy, for that reason. So your
Yes, and the
program, mashallah,
exercise
would,
makes them release.
very
Sometimes
beneficial
we
for them.
shove, sometimes we
Yeah.
jump, and we push and shove. They kind of use that when they really
yeah,
feel comfortable doing it, not when they have to.
yeah, yeah.
So we just to do it as fun.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's play.
Because I heard stories when a child, artistic kid child, like does something bad, he gets excited, he laughs.
Yeah, some of them.
Some of it I heard.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't have a child,
I
artistic
mean,
child,
just like
but
all
I have a
children-
sick child too.
Yeah,
You
just
know
like
what I
all
mean?
children who test boundaries, autistic children are gonna test boundaries as well, you know?
Because
like,
I've seen it,
that
I've seen it
happens,
happen.
yeah.
They get excited as well, you know. I mean, and they have fun. And like I said, it's something we can try. And I'm willing to do like about like an hour a week or something.
All right, so that's good. That's great that you'll offer that. Hopefully, this will encourage, and you know, inshallah, the
Yeah.
families to come out and say, "I have a child with autism," because I still feel like there's a lot. Like we're saying, 1 in every 59 children are diagnosed with autism. We have more than 59 families coming to Sharon. So chances are there's a good number of Muslim children who are striving with autism. So we need to help them feel more comfortable in saying, I have a child with autism, you know? Yeah.
And it's actually, martial arts is very beneficial to
Yeah.
them on many levels, but especially on 2 levels. It's like you mentioned, because they have muscle weakness
Yeah.
in certain areas, so it helps strengthen those muscles.
Yeah.
And also it helps with focus and concentration.
Oh, yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure.
And they actually thrive because they are good with patterns.
Exactly.
And martial arts is all about
Yeah,
patterns.
exactly.
Actually, my older son learns twice as fast as his peers.
Inshallah.
And also it gives them a sense of accomplishment and inclusion because it's based on merit. Like you don't pass a belt just because you did, you really have to work on it to get that belt or to get that stripe. It's based on merit.
Right.
And it really gives them a sense of accomplishment.
Right,
And
inshallah.
it's really very helpful and very beneficial to them.
Inshallah.
And I just want to add one more thing on the supportive. It would be great to see Muslim advocacy for children that attend public school. People who can go with parents to IEP meetings.
I actually do that.
Teach them with rights. Okay,
Yeah,
that would be
I
actually
do
great.
that.
Because many people don't know their rights.
No, they don't.
Yes.
And reading the IEP also
Yeah.
is
Okay.
very challenging. And
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're both autism advocates. I'm an educator.
Okay, that's great.
So I go with other parents into those meetings. And what the funny thing is that I actually bring someone into the meetings with me. So I don't sit there alone, and I don't recommend that other parents sit in those
alone, I
meetings
agree.
alone.
Yeah.
Even if it's you and your husband, bring someone else who is a specialized autism advocate
Yes.
who understands the jargon, who understands what they're supposed to be doing. Because that meeting is for goals.
Yes.
And if they're not meeting the goals, then we have a problem.
Yes.
We have to figure out what needs to be changed and what other resources from the school district or outside of the district needs to come in to support that family. So I always tell parents, don't go by yourself. Bring someone else.
It's important. And then the other thing is with
From city to city, from school district to school district, some are going to be more generous in what they'll provide than others.
Yes.
So I can tell you right now, like everyone says how awesome the Mansfield public school system is, and they're really good. But those are the families who don't have children with special needs, who need an IEP or need goals and all of this. So you also should really know like what your town, is going to be able to provide in terms of those services. Some families, they think that their child has really mild delays. They might not even need a lot of extra support. And maybe they're not failing anything academically. They're not failing math. They're not, and so they request for an evaluation, but then, the school system might say, look, you have a diagnosis, yeah, but your child has a diagnosis, but you're not going to qualify for an IEP because you're not feeling anything. This is a misconception, by the way. But some school systems will try to pull that. They will try to pull that. So there's certain things that you need to be kind of aware of. And yeah, like Sister Juwayriyah was saying, it's very important to have someone be there with you because you're the parent and you want what's best for your child and your heart is invested in it. And you might not always know what your rights are, but if you bring someone with you into those meetings who is more objective but as passionate for the rights of your child as you are, then you'll be inshallah, will be more barakah in it for you and your child. Yeah, inshallah.
Because they'll definitely try to shut you down. It's about dollars and
Exactly.
cents,
Yes.
right? It's a dollars and cents game for them. They want to keep the least amount of money that they can spend without having to go outside of the district. So
but to be fair though, there are some towns which are really, really like anything that you need, they'll give you. Not the majority of them, but there are some that.
I'm so happy with the town district. I know Attleboro is not a great school district.
Attleboro, but North Attleboro is.
But for special need, they're really great.
Are they? Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. North Attleboro too is, mashallah, excellent. Like, they're really, really good.
But
Alhamdulillah.
like I said, you have to let them know that you know your rights.
Yes.
And you're willing to advocate for your child.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important, it's essential. And I think that if we, if we know like what our concerns are and we're being the more specific we are too, I think the better it is because, you might have a child and you're like, yeah, they have some needs, but I'm not really sure. And you go in and you call, my child has some needs, but I'm not really sure. They're like, okay, let's evaluate. But if you say, no, I think my child needs an OT eval, PT eval, a speech eval, an audiology eval, whatever, then they're like, okay, this lady knows what she's talking about. We're not going to be able to and granted, let's assume that most of them have good hearts, but like she said, it's about
the dollar.
comes down to the dollar, right? And having said
To
that,
keep their jobs. They're not doing it. They're not going to pocket that, but just to keep their jobs.
Exactly.
Where they keep their
Exactly.
system.
Exactly. But having said that, the Islamic schools, we also eventually, inshallah, we want to be able to push into the Islamic schools and want them to be able to welcome our children as well. And not to say that it has to come out of their funding or anything like that, but just to break down the barrier that, look, this child has special needs, but there's not much you really need to do in order to support them. Close the door so that there's not background noise. Put tennis balls under the chairs so that when the chairs are being moved, they're not distracted with the sound of this chair scratching against the floor.
Or call the parent to come help at the end of the day.
Or have the parent come in, or yeah, exactly. Or have the child sit up in the front, or actually have the child sit in the back. There's so many different things that does not involve the dollar, that can be done. And it's inshallah, inshallah, we'll hopefully be able to, this is just planting seeds, right? This is just planting seeds, and it's in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hands.
And the thing is that we as Muslim parents, we want our children in Muslim schools.
Yes.
We want them to be included. That means I didn't have to send them to, 8 hours a day to a public school. I wouldn't. But the services are not there. So it's like you're always playing catch up. So if we can support each other as parents or community members who have children on the spectrum, adults and youth on the spectrum, we have the support of the Muslim communities and boards, then we can all work together to find those and close those gaps. and find alternatives and find grants and find resources so that we can bring money into the Muslim community.
Right.
We have to be able to support each other. It's no longer appropriate saying, oh, we can't accommodate your child. Well, what can you do? What do you need to do to accommodate me? Maybe we can work together to find those resources. Maybe we can find those grants. This is Massachusetts. Alhamdulillah, we're one of the first states in the United States to really address special education, starting with Helen Keller. So this is not a new thing in Massachusetts. This is one of the states where funding is available for special education programs, special education training, and on, OT, speech. This is one of those states, not like in the South where things are very tight. Alhamdulillah, we're in a great state where we can find resources. How do we bring those resources to our community so that we're all supported? That's the next step for the future, inshallah.
Inshallah, just to take it a step back, and we've been talking about schools for a few minutes, but just talking about the homes one more time in terms of teaching our children and nurturing their hearts on the fitrah, of La ilaha illallah. The other thing is I have a sensory Salah PDF guide that if anyone wants, they can just email it to me, and I won't remember, so if you can just email me or text me, and I'll send it to you, inshallah. It's a sensory Salah guide, and in looking at different ways we can incorporate sensory activities even within the Salah that's not distracting to anyone else, but it's helping that child regulate their sensory stimulation. Yeah.
Inshallah. Just remind me because I'll forget who wanted it and didn't.
So moving on to narratives, and we want to stay on time. Narratives on autism. We've been talking briefly about that, and I'll also move on to the next slide. But recognizing and again acknowledging where people are and families and caregivers are on their journey is really important, especially for our fathers and other male figures who are dealing with autism, who have autistic children, or family members who are their primary caregivers. We want to make sure that they have the appropriate support to express where they are on their journey and they're not feeling alone. Because there's so many different parts of that journey. When you first get the diagnosis, and this is something that we have to discuss, it is hard. And a lot of people say, oh, just say mashallah. Really? Oh, just say alhamdulillah. Just say mashallah. Keep going. Well, how do you do that when your heart hurts? How do you move on from grief? Of course, alhamdulillah, you can move on from grief. You can get stronger, but we have to acknowledge the place that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought us to. And acknowledging that it does feel challenging. It does feel hurtful. It does feel gloomy. It does feel like you don't know even where to turn or who to go for help. Because in our communities, we don't have a lot of support so we can go to right now. Oh, my child was diagnosed with autism and epilepsy at 8 months. And her epilepsy is a very rare form of epilepsy. 1 in 100,000. Most people have never heard of it. Most pediatricians have never heard of it. So I was 25 at the time, and I had a child who was sick. And no one understood. There wasn't any other parents in my area, they told me. I said, well, are there any other parents I can talk to? They told me I'm the only one. 400 miles. They said, because I'm from Western Massachusetts, for those who came in, you have to go to Boston Children's Hospital, drive, the 2 hours to Boston, and you'll find some parents there who have this condition that your daughter has. So there wasn't anyone 100 miles around me with this particular condition. So you feel a little bit of grief. You feel a little bit of, I don't know what I'm doing. Overwhelmed for sure. And it's not enough to say to people who are in that particular position, in that spot on their journey, to just get over it. Make salah. You can help people. Hugs are nice.
Just, even if you just say to them, like, that's really tough, what can I do? Or is there anything I can do? Or just sit there with them, give them a hug, you know? You don't have to have the answers for them, you know? I mean, we all want to fix everyone's problems, but really it's Allah who fixes our situations, right? So just be there for them, just listen, you know, be that ear for them. You might not understand their situation. You certainly, if you haven't gone through it, you have no idea what it even feels like on the level of, you know, your heart. But always remember the prophetic empathy, you know, of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Always remember that. And always remember that just because they're going through a struggle doesn't mean that they're not going to have wins. And maybe that's what you can remind them of as well. Like what you're going through, I can't even imagine how difficult that must be, you know? And when the time is right, maybe you can help them find the strengths, you know? Like our brother here, he saw the strengths in his child with autism, and his child with autism now is, mashallah, like, you know, he's great at what he does. What is it? Is it Taekwondo, he said? Am I saying it right? Taekwondo?
Extreme martial arts.
Yeah, martial arts, you know? Everyone has their strengths. You know, and when I was in Saudi Arabia, there are children with autism who, mashallah, they can blow you out of the water with the recitation of Quran. They weren't physical, but the recitation of Quran was like, yani, mashallah. You know? So, I mean, everyone's going to have their strengths. So always just listen to what they have to say. Don't say, oh, poor you. Say, that's really tough. You know, it's going to be really tough. I'm here for you, you know? Whatever it is that you need, you know? Inshallah. And do whatever your ability.
But and recognize that we all have tests. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tests us all. And just because someone's test is different than yours doesn't mean that it's easier or harder. You know, don't pity them. Oh, poor you, what are you going to do? Or you know, what are you going to do with that child? You know?
We've said this like maybe 10 times now. No pity.
No
pity.
You know, like, you know, what are you going to do with that child? Where are you going to put them? You know? Or
what about school? What are you going to do?
Or,
yeah, what are you going to do when you go to work? How are you
Because
going to
they're not
make them
going to
with
grow up to
someone?
be doctors.
yeah,
and
you
engineers.
know?
But that's not true. Like I said again,
Yeah.
the
Still
series,
remind them.
it made my son, like my older son, I don't have time, artistic. I just said, we're little brothers, and we were trying to be considerate.
Yeah.
So after watching the series, he actually told me, you know what, Mama? I think I want to be autistic and I want to be a doctor, just like Dr. Murphy. I said, you can check the first one off the box. Work on the second one. Because, again, that series, and this is what I want all people to do for our Muslim kids.
Yeah.
Because he saw he was special, but actually he was superior to other surgeons because he had, like, he could just see the whole human body just like he's seen it. You know, he was very visual. And, you know, that gave him the ability to solve problems, which, you know, his other colleagues didn't have.
Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah, and he was like my son really was so impressed that he wanted to be actually autistic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
When
so
Allah
gives.
gives, yeah.
Allah gives.
SubhanAllah says, really, like Allah gives and takes from every single one of us. If He takes something, He puts something better in its place. This is what we have to remember. SubhanAllah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Nevertheless, Allah, you know, when you give up something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He replaces it. He guarantees that He will replace it with something better. And we have to remember this, that tests, they come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He never leaves us alone. So we don't want Muslims in our community to fall into despair, because that's not from our deen.
No.
But at the same time, we do want to recognize the hurt, the challenge, and be supportive and give love, make sure that they're acknowledging them, you know, different programs and trainings, and just be kind. Be kind. If you can, it's a small word, a smile, is a sadaqah. So we want to make sure that we're doing that, because know that it is a challenge. It can feel heavy. But alhamdulillah, there is always a way to move forward. Allah is not going to leave you alone. I promise you, Allah is not going to leave you alone. He's not going to let you fall down. If you hold on to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will pull you through, even if you don't walk it. Even if you feel like you cannot walk it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability to pull you through your test. With your children, with yourself, whatever you're going through. So we want to make sure that we're not allowing people in our communities to feel like they're stuck in despair. There's something that you can do. There's help. There's a way through it, inshallah.
talked about special education. Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, well, I'm not really going to talk about it because we already said, I just wanted to make it apparent to people that if anyone needs any special education consultations, any special needs advocacy or anything like this, they can always contact me for free support, inshallah. You know, I'll give you my personal cell phone number, it's okay. This is coming from my heart, and Allah knows best. But I feel like there's too many people out there who are struggling, and I feel like if we all just do a little bit of what we can do, then inshallah, like our community will grow and it will flourish, you know, subhanAllah. Again, planting the seeds. And I encourage that whatever strengths that you all have, whatever it is that you can do, you also do it, inshallah. Because my strengths might be your weaknesses, but that doesn't mean that my weaknesses are not your strengths. You know, I could benefit from you, just as you could all benefit, you know, we could all benefit from one another, inshallah.
I'm the same. I'm in Western Massachusetts, but I also do autism advocacy in Western Massachusetts, primarily in the Springfield, West Springfield, and Holyoke districts, school districts. I am online. I do different workshops online. I do a creative writing workshop online during the month of Ramadan. So anytime, inshallah, you want to talk about the spectrum, about ways that you can advocate for yourself in the schools, I'm willing to do that as well, inshallah.
And she has her book here too, mashallah. I have to brag a little bit because this is the first time I'm holding this book. I've seen it online everywhere, but I hope you brought extra copies. Okay, great, mashallah. So she's a well-known author, mashallah, in the Muslim community, probably non-Muslim community as well, mashallah, and there are also Muslim information sheets over here as well, and then also my Madina therapy cards you're welcome to take with my contact information.
Yeah, just a little bit about the book, Hen's Hands, a story about autism. It is the first English book written in the United States about Muslim families and autism support. It came out in 2008. So, you know, I've been pushing this book. I get it out to Muslim schools. I've sent it to Muslim schools down this way, daycare centers, libraries throughout the state. I try to keep this book as low as possible. I always sell it for less than $10 for the last 10 years because I think it's important for representation that we exist, that there are autists who are also Muslim. Also, it's about families and how families can speak up and explain autism to their other children. This was a book that me and my daughter, who was going to be turning 18, we wrote about my daughter Hind, and how I would explain autism to her older sister, who is the big sister, you know. And that's a challenge as well when you have children in the home who some are on the spectrum and some aren't. And how do they make relationships with them? How do they grow love and bond with children, their sisters or brothers who are behaving differently? So, inshallah, if you know any daycare centers in the area or Muslim schools who would like to have the book, please let me know and I can make that available to you, inshallah.
As an occupational therapist, I don't work in the state of Massachusetts because I'm still in the process of re-establishing my license. I used to do OT years ago before we moved to Saudi Arabia, but now that we're back, I am licensed in the state of Rhode Island though. But having said that, as an OT, if anyone has any issues with their IEPs or anything like that, or just wants to, you know, get an extra set of eyes on their child, so that you can go back to the school feeling a little bit more empowered, please do let me know, inshallah. And I'd be happy to do that from a therapeutic perspective. And the Boston survey. So we've been really trying to be loud about this in the community. As you all know, it's you know, ICNE, Sharon and Quincy, alhamdulillah, got Boston certified. There's a survey, you go to the link. If you have a child with any sort of special needs, disabilities, if you have a parent or if you have a spouse who has mental illness, if you have an aging grandparent, whatever it is, and they need extra support, it's important that you let us help you by letting us know who you are, but it's anonymous. So what happens is when you fill out this, when you go to this link and you fill out the information, it goes to the headquarters of Mohsen. Mohsen doesn't tell us who you are. So that shame factor, don't even worry about that. You don't have to be embarrassed. First of all, we don't want anyone to be embarrassed. However, for those of you who are still kind of feeling not comfortable in saying my child has autism. My daughter has Down syndrome. My wife has a mental illness. You know, because this stuff happens in our communities. Drugs and alcohol. I'm saying this in the messages, and Allah's my witness. Drugs and alcohol also happens in our community. Okay, in this community. I'm not talking about some other faraway community in Massachusetts. You know, subhanAllah. So if you are going, or if your family, someone that you know, Muslim, going through these sorts of hardships and these sorts of struggles, it's important that you allow us to have that information, even anonymously, so that we can be empowered to create programs and to be more welcoming to you and your families. Because just because you're going through these struggles doesn't mean you have to do it alone. So I urge every single one of you to be loud about this link, go to it, fill it out, and share it with others, inshallah.
So we are at the end of this particular workshop. Inshallah, I hope that everyone has learned something, that we have answered your questions. If you have any reflections at this time that you would like to share with us, inshallah, some suggestions, feel free.
Currently in this area there isn't, but if you would like to, I would love to, I'd love to help you create one, inshallah, because I know a handful of children who do have autism that are Muslim. And so, yeah, I would love to say that. I would love to start it up, inshallah.
There is online. Sohada has an online group that is a fabulous group to plug into. Lots of sisters from across the state of Massachusetts are, plugged into her support group. So I think that's a great place, and that's a great support. I know, when my daughter was first diagnosed with epilepsy and autism in 2006. The only way that I could get support was online. And alhamdulillah, I learned so much online from those people throughout the state of Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, as far as New York, who was sending me information, things like that. So don't feel like if you don't have anything in your particular area that you can't get support online.
That's right.
Inshallah, we would love to have you.
Absolutely. The group that I run on, it's on Facebook. It's called Serving Muslim Moms and Children with Special Needs. It's a long title, but it's not just for children who have autism, but different sorts of issues. So you're more than welcome to join. I would love to have you, and then we need to connect, because I would love. That's another thing. I hope this to-do list. One of the things is to get like a support group going, even if it's just once a month for an hour, or it's something at a physical location. Inshallah, in the session. Anything else? No? Barakallahu feekum. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this from all of us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for anything that we have may said. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep our intentions pure and reward those who also helped with the setup, like Brother Imran, mashallah, who was part of the committee, everyone, all of you, mashallah.